Recording session. There you go. So good evening from myself. I think I've never spoken in English on a Bildünger webinar before. So bear with me. My English also is not in use too often, but Okan's is for sure. So we will have a nice time today. We just wait a couple of more minutes, so 1 or 2 minutes, because we have actually 20 people that registered. So let's wait 1 to 2 minutes if more people will show up. So as we are waiting for the others to join just quickly, so this is a new format we are trying. So this is a fireside chat, as you can see here, being the idea that we will have actually Isabella and myself asking questions to Okan in the course of this fireside chat. But then at some point we'll also invite the audience to come up with some really insightful questions. So the goal is today to talk about system change, and for that we have invited Okan McAllister, founder of the One Day Conference and one of the experts in system change here in Vienna and also probably beyond. So I'm very happy to have you here, Okan. Your host for the day next to me, and who will also be asking questions, is actually Isabella, and I invite you to quickly introduce yourself. Asking questions is actually you to quickly.
Hi, sorry, my internet was lagging. I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Isabella. I'm a project manager at the Katharina Turnauer Privatstiftung. We're one of the founding members of the Bildungsstiftung. And I'm also have the pleasure to work together with Michael and others on the Bildünger campaign. And I'm very excited to learn more about systems change today.
And great to have you here also, Isabella. I know Isabella is always also forcing me to think differently with her questions. So Okan, be prepared for some very piercing questions from Isabella. Also, I welcome Irene Schenk from the Bildungsstiftung, who will say some introductory words on why this topic might be relevant.
Yeah, thank you. Very warm welcome from my side. I'm a member of the board of the Bildungsstiftung, and actually Michael or Michael asked me to talk some words why system change is relevant for us and why we are working so hard on it. And I want to start with a counter question: how could it not be? Yeah, if you work in the field of education, which is such an important systemic topic which reaches so many persons, people, communities, etc. So we are really having this understanding of changing systems, supporting projects in a wider systemic way. So I'm really glad that we have something like that in our first fireside chat, such an important topic. And I'm really looking forward. Please take the opportunity to focus on the topic, be here, be with us, and ask your questions. Thank you. Actually, we can't hear you, Michael. You have to.
Just realized that. Still happening, still got a pandemic going on. Yeah, so again, we will start off with some very basic questions, obviously, on why system change is important. And I want to kick off and go right to the fireside chat with Okan. So Okan, what is system change?
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks for spending your evening with us. Let's start right off the bat with what is system change. Now, the term, this term is starting to become more and more popular in the last decade or so. So you will hear many different definitions of it. There are various interpretations of system change and what it means. I've read many different definitions, and they have a couple of things in common. So the thing that they all suggest is shifting things from one state to another. That's the one thing that all of the definitions are common. Now, what does that mean? Let's talk about shifting first, what I mean by shifting. And then second, let's talk about what I mean by things, okay? So shifting, there's one thing that we need to understand about change that is really important. The idea I've mentioned that I will probably mention later of emergence. So the whole, in systems, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. This is called emergence. So the complicated thing about emergence is we don't actually know with full confidence when elements come together, what they will actually result. So when you, for example, change a law and regulation, everybody has some solution for system change. When you do these things, you don't actually know what it's actually going to unlock at the very end. We'll talk about this a bit more in detail. So then we are tempted to say, let's change this law, let's change regulation, let's give more money to impact work, but no one can actually know what will emerge out of this because the effects of those moves are incredibly complex and unpredictable. That's the characteristic of a complex problem that we are all trying to solve. So when we say shifting things from one state to another, we don't assume that we actually know where it should be. We just define it by saying things, by saying that system, this system does need to change because of X, Y, and Z. This system doesn't produce an optimal outcome for X, Y, and Z. So the only thing we can really know for sure, but shifting, changing, is that when we do something in the system as an element of the system, something else in the system will change. This is the only certainty we can bring to change overall. The second thing, the things, right? In most definitions of system change, this is the change, we talked about the change part, the shifting part, now the things part. When I say shifting things, definitions differ in terms of what these things are and how we know that a system changes, right? So some people define it as shifting root causes of a problem. So this is actually Ashoka's definition. Another interpretation is changing the rules of the game. So this could be how things are done, how that certain system functions, the structures of the system, creating new ways of doing things is another way, new rules, new ways of organizing, new relationships, or the new ways that elements of the system affect each other. So the elements of the system could be you, me, it could be other things that affect the system. Another interpretation is mindsets, paradigms, narratives, mental models changing. So when some or all or one, depending on the system, of one of these elements, one of these things shift from one state to another when they change, this is usually what people refer to as systems change.
Perhaps, thank you so much, first of all, for this beginning explanation. But one thing that I always ask myself is, we talk about system change, but how do we know what defines a system? How do you say that that's the system you want to change? I have some difficulties understanding that.
A system is an entity that has interrelations and interdependencies between the parts. So we're a little system right now in the Zoom call, technically speaking. It's defined by, system is defined by its boundaries. So it depends on which question you're asking. If you're saying like, yeah, I don't know, education inequality in Vienna, Austria, then that system will look very different. On the other hand, if you say, okay, my organization, my NGO, my company, that system will look completely different. But one thing they will all have in common is interrelation. So all the elements are interrelated with each other in some way, shape, or form. And they are interdependent as well. So they rely on one another in some way, shape, or form. And the thing to also, this very important thing to understand about systems is the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So, yeah. And other people define systems as elements coming together for a common purpose. So there are also very different definitions of systems. There's elements, interrelations, interdependence, usually some sort of a purpose.
But then if I can follow up on another question, how big does the system that, if we're talking about systems change, how, I guess if it's just our Zoom call, then it's not going to be enough to create a change. Is there somehow a definition that you say, okay, in order to accomplish this, you need to choose a system of a certain size, or?
Yeah. So technically speaking, we're all part of many different systems. And by the definition of systems, even this Zoom call has some sort of an impact on that system. Will it change that system? We don't know. We have no idea. But it does have some sort of an impact on the system. Maybe meaningful for what you want to achieve, but maybe not so meaningful. So there's not much you can do that doesn't affect the system. So this is actually good news about system change, because systems change all the time. You're a part of the change process as we speak right now. So I wouldn't say that you have to choose some sort of a system to change and focus on that, because everything you do, a lot of us, I'm assuming if you're on this call, you're doing some sort of an impact work in some way, shape, or form, or activism or something else. Everything you do does make a difference. Although we are used to seeing like, okay, I'm going to do this X and then Y is going to happen. This is very difficult to see in systems. So it's very difficult to say, okay, we had the Zoom call and we changed the education system in Austria.
And it's really interesting that you.
But that's the case with also any NGO, any oh, sorry, you guys I got cut off. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, my connection. Sorry about that. It's really interesting that you mentioned the Zoom call as a system, because in the recent weeks and months, a lot of talk is going on about climate change, and the International Panel on Climate Change always releases models, and there are also systems interacting, and so. Can you quickly describe what's the difference between the system change we talk about here and the systems that are used in models to predict the change we see in the climate?
So in systems thinking, they say all models are wrong, some are useful. One of the main reasons for this is all systems, you need to have boundaries to a system to be able to model it. And this is technically wrong, because systems don't have that many boundaries usually, unless you're looking at very niche things. So we're all interconnected, and then we're interconnected with other people, and we have our friends. So if you really go all the way out, we're all interconnected in some way in the world, right? So for this reason, you have to have boundaries. And for something like climate change, you can create a system according to the elements that matter the most, right? And then create models around what will happen if we do this and if we do that. But in the case of something like climate change modeling, this goes more into system dynamics, because you could technically calculate what will happen if the CO2 levels rise, for example. In general, you can't calculate the impact of this Zoom call on the education system in Austria, for example. So of course, the Earth is a system as well. Climate change is a complex issue that forces us to break silos. We need experts that are expert in dust and smoke, all the way to aerosols and ice loss and methane release. And they all need to work together to create these models. And some are predictable, and some are calculatable.
So just to paraphrase, systems are models, like mental models of humans to explain what's happening. They are not reality. They are representations of something that's going on in the world, and that we use to better understand this.
Did you say systems modeling is that, or systems is that?
Does it make a difference?
Yes. Systems are definitely a reality. Systems are not a simulation. But in order to understand complex systems thinking aims to look at systems as systems, as complex beings that are not predictable. So in order to be able to use it and practice in real life, sometimes you will resort to things like system dynamics, systems modeling, where you try to make sense of how the elements interact with each other. So what do they give to each other? What do they take away from each other? And then you can start to see the actual system working. And then depending on what your goal is, you can try to intervene in a certain place, et cetera, et cetera. But the modeling is a lot of times, especially system dynamics, is done to gain clarity over how the system works and what it looks like.
Perhaps jumping again into the context of what we're all working on, and we all have the ambition to work in a system, to shift a system, to change a system. But how can I, as an organization or as an initiative, know that I'm, first of all, working towards systems change? What do I need to know I'm going in the right direction or not? How do I realize that I'm actually achieving systems change? Just kind of maybe on a hands-on perspective, taking it down to the nitty-gritty reality.
Okay. Okay, I think I need to first explain what systems thinking is before we can jump into that part just yet. Mm-hmm. I will do that first, and then I will answer your question. So systems thinking comes from system science, which is a part of complexity theory, which is part of physics. So when we say systems, we could mean various things. There's no one definition that applies to social impact scenarios. Right? Systems thinking is not necessarily a canvas or a tool or an app or a simulation that you can use, but it's more of a mindset and philosophy. Right? What we mean by systems thinking and systemic impact focuses on the mindset with which we take action. This is called systems thinking. Right? And what it does is this. So with the traditional way that we analyze complex problems, for example, can be found in academic research. What happens in academic research is, it's a reductionist approach. What happens is, you have this big concept, you break it down to smaller concepts, you understand the small concepts, which then adds up to you understanding the big concept, right? So this is what a reductionist approach looks like, and it works very well for research. However, complex systems are not suitable for this sort of analysis. This is because of the reason I mentioned earlier, is the system's behavior is much more difficult to compute than a simple 1 + 1 = 2. Right? This is because, again, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So 1 + 1 is not 2 in systems. 1 + 1 can be 100. It can be 25. It could be banana. We don't know. Depends. So systems thinking focuses on how a system's parts interrelate and how systems work over time and in relation to other systems. So all in all, it allows us to do a few things. One, it allows us to make more informed decisions. Two, it specifically analyzes and addresses the root causes of the problem. And at three, it helps us adapt to the changing complexity of the issue itself. So now that we got systems thinking, approaching impact work, embodying this mindset is going to be the closest you'll get to systemic impact. And now let's get a bit more practical. Okay, so how can we know we're working in systems? How can we know we're doing systems related work? So as I said earlier, 1 + 1 = banana. Okay, so we also said that this means it's very difficult to say, I've done X, that caused Y. I started this organization, it caused system change. This is because there are not many cause and effect relationships like this that you can take credit by yourself. So it's very difficult to have some sort of like a check to see if you're doing some systems work. However, I'll give you a very simple tool you can use to see which part of the problem you're working on. And then I will give you some questions that you can ask yourself maybe to see where you might stand. okay? So most of the time, it's not what happens after your intervention in a system, your project, your organization, but it's about how you start that define kind of your trajectory and where you end up within that system. So let's start with the tool. You may have heard this before. It's a very popular one for explaining systems thinking. It's called the Iceberg model, okay? So imagine an iceberg. Imagine 4 layers in the iceberg, and imagine that only the top layer is above the water. So that one is very visible to see, and the bottom 3 layers are not so easy to see. The very bottom layer represents mental models. So mental models are what values the people hold about the system, what assumptions the people have about the system, what beliefs shape that system. One above layer is system structure. How are the parts related? What influences the patterns? What influences the elements? Is it does funding change everything? What is the thing that changes the patterns in the system? The third layer, right below the events, right below the top layer, is what trends are there over time? What has been happening? So Earth is warming up, inequality is increasing, et cetera, et cetera. And then the event itself is what is happening right now? What is the observable truth we see at this moment? So the deeper you go, the deeper your work addresses within that iceberg, from mental models to the actual consequences, the more leverage you have for system change. So if you're working to change mental models, for example, you're likelier to unlock more change within that system.
Can I just quickly stop you there, Okan, because I think this is an important point. So the idea basically is that you're actually saying that this is more like a tool for me to make decisions and hope, almost like in a religion, that I'd be more impactful with, like trying to really understand a problem very deeply and tackle the root causes of a problem. But it's basically, to me, it sounds like a religion. I hope that I'm more impactful, but I will never know. There's never going to be proof, because the problem also with systems is if I have the Austrian education system, I don't have a second Austrian education system, which I can compare it to, right? So if I do an intervention in the Austrian education system, I don't know what that system would have looked like without me intervening in it, no? So it's kind of like always hoping and making better decisions using those tools, but I will never know.
You will never know until after the fact, no. So you can have theories about, let's change this, let's change that, and this is the problem, and that is the problem. And this is probably the most unattractive part of the behavior of systems. It's incredibly difficult for you to say, okay, when this law changes, then inequality will reduce. It might sound like common sense, but that's not how systems behave, right? You could, I'll give you one simple example. When people started the first lobby for glass bottles in Austria, instead of plastic bottles for milk and everything, right? I've never seen any news about any research to say we should use glass over plastic. And then I read them. And then it's what I read was, it makes sense if, and then there are bullet points with the if it is actually can be used multiple times, and this is how many times it should be used. If the recycling plant is this many kilometers away, if blah, 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 right? This is because obviously glass is significantly heavier than plastic, and the CO2 you create by transporting all this glass eats up to the savings of CO2 you would have. Of course, this is a CO2 perspective of the system. If you look at the plastic waste perspective of the system, everything is fine because there's less plastic now. But there are a lot of unintended consequences you can have if you don't have a systems view on the problem you're approaching. And because 1 + 1 = banana, this is called emergence, there's no 100% for sure way for you to be able to say, this is the law I'm going to change and it's going to have this impact and no other impact whatsoever, because everything is interdependent. and everything is interconnected. So of course, it's going to make a difference on other parts.
But perhaps as an organization, is there any way that I can know at least if I'm kind of going into the right direction? Because I understand that 1 + 1 = banana, and if you do one thing, it impacts another. But then how can I decide as a project, as an initiative, that this is what I should be working on? Because at the same time, there's a million other things I could be doing. Do you have any tips?
That's a very common question. So here is, I will say one thing and then I will answer this question. The first thing I will say is, this is a very common pitfall that organizations fall into, right? Because we're change makers. We want to do things and we want to see change. We want to report the change. We want to create all these PDFs. It's going to be amazing, right? But we have to do a few other things before we do that. Right? So this is what I meant earlier about systems thinking being more of a mindset and a philosophy in which you approach things rather than doing X, Y, Z and doing a bullet point of things and now you're doing system change. I wish I could tell you to say do 1 to 10 and then you got system change, but this is not possible. Nobody can tell you this. I will give you some questions you can ask for yourself, for your organization, that will kind of check if you are in that systems thinking mindset or not, right? Number 1, do you assume you know the solution of this complex problem? Because you most probably don't. Are you operating from that claim? Do you ever feel like you have competition? Do you act like competition? When was the last time you had meaningful conversations about your proposed solution, your impact, your system, your problem with other people that are not your partners as an organization? When was the last time you talked to academics, other NGOs that you're not partners with, or other stakeholders? What are your core offerings, products and services revolved around an idea that your founder came up with, or are they based on the needs of the current system? What is inhibiting your organization to change, adapt? I didn't say who, I said what. These are, I'm very aware, very inconvenient questions, but there are great places to start thinking about. And if you feel like you're in a good space and you've been working with it, and it will be important to become a learning organization that continuously transforms itself according to the learnings of the members and the organization itself, according to what the system needs, right? One system right now might need dialogue, another one might need money, another one might need lobbying, another one might need law change, another one might need something else. So if you had a project that you wanted to have a certain outcome, it's important to talk about your goals, but it's also the unintended consequences of your project, whatever you implemented. And not only talk about the impact you had, but also what other impact did you have within your system, not just the problem. What about the other stakeholders? What about everybody else, right? Every time you do this, you will learn more and more about the system you are in and how it gives you feedback. And you can explore how it changes over time and how it's related to other systems. And on this way, you can also socialize these learnings with organizations around you. So I didn't give you a project idea, right? It's a mindset that you can apply to anything you're doing, any project you're doing, anything that you are doing. It's just the mindset of how you approach your work. You can still do similar things, but to know the system, know your role in that system, and know how you can be a more meaningful element of that system, that's a great place to start.
Okay, Okan, just to stress it again, so system thinking is a mindset, and to me it almost seems like psychotherapy. You know, at psychotherapy you try to question yourself, you try to think, are you doing the right thing in your life, you know? And this is psychotherapy almost for impact organizations or for social entrepreneurs, you know. You kind of look at the work you're doing and you're really critically looking at it. I think that's a really important takeaway. We have a lot of other smart people here in the room, and that's why I want to invite the audience to ask their questions. And I see already, I think Lisa is posting already in the chat. Lisa, maybe you want to ask Okan directly or say something.
Hey, you. I'm just trying to protocol some of the wise words here.
Can you quickly introduce yourself maybe before you say something?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
I'm Lisa. I'm sitting in Vorarlberg, and I am an entrepreneur myself on a social basis, because I do workshops for schools and school classes, also organizational development for companies. So I'm trying to to get along with the early birds of society in all branches. And I started 4 years ago a project which was the idea of bringing the method of sociocracy more into schools, and to look for an answer: how can as many students experience the open sociocratic election? And the answer, or like the first step for this project, was to publicate a brochure, which is now available in digital version and analog version. And I had like it's I don't know, a zero world problem, but what we did was that we sent it out, these brochures, to schools, and it just spread it into the world, and I couldn't tangle it back for feedback. So it's just like out there, and I have no clue what it did, or what people did with it, if they are struggling, if they have success. And the question from this experience rises: how can we reduce our ego on that we actually need to hear like success, and that we need to have this ego pushed clapping hands, yeah, you did a good job for our change, or something like this. This is something what I'm on the one side craving for. On the other side, I'm getting feedback time by time, and the brochure is downloaded like once a month for a 3-year regular basis. And maybe we need to start learning to see like the system changes in a non-directive way. And the question, like, if you experience something like this as well.
Great question. Especially in social entrepreneurship, yes, a lot. I say that as a social entrepreneur myself, definitely. Now, there are pros and cons, again, with any sort of intervention. The pro is it's much easier to market social entrepreneurship when you have this hero model of people changing the world and founding things. We would probably have less social entrepreneurs if it wasn't marketed that way. So technically, that could be something, maybe, I don't know, maybe it leads to positive emergence. I don't know. But the first thing I will say is the existing system of impact work, as far as in my subjective experience, is not congruent with thinking in systems. So you get some EU funding or something, and you do a project. You do your reports, you send it out, you meet the deadline, you send your finances, everything, you get the money back, and you move on with your life, right? So a lot of people that are doing impact work, there's not as many opportunities where you can have this feedback cycle. There's no time. Half of the heads of vereins are stuck doing funding applications. I know this very well, right? So the existing system is not really fitting this so much, right? So that's number one. I'm just saying that so that nobody here should feel bad about any of this. This is the name of the game currently. But maybe that's the system we could change. Now we can change the rules of that game. But anyway, the second thing I will say about what you just said is, this is one of the biggest disadvantages of systems thinking. I've seen so far 2 disadvantages. Both of them have nothing to do with systems theory, but more about us as human race implementing systems thinking. It could be difficult. First, it requires a lot of objectivity, and which for the human race is quite difficult to do. It's difficult to observe the system you are in from an outside dimension, which makes it difficult to practice. The second point of this disadvantage, which is more what you were talking about, which this is a subjective observation of mine. It's not a scientific observation. I find it hard in practice because I think it's not as attractive as other things that we market in civil society. I think we don't have incentives to think in systemic terms, whether it's how to find financing or how to deal with bureaucracy or other stakeholders. We want to build up our organizations, find some financial resources, feel like we're changing something. Perhaps most of our ideas, I mean, I found that a couple of things, maybe they're useless. I don't know. There's no way for me to really know. I can talk to the people I've worked with and they say, oh, this had an impact on me, but that's pretty much the only certainty I will get from it. Most of us don't actually know. We know the impact we had on some people perhaps, but we don't know what role we play in the bigger picture. We will also have to accept the fact that there will never be perfect solutions, but instead more focused on understanding that the choices we make will have an impact on the other parts of the system. This impact it will have, you can't know for sure, but you can know for sure that it will have an impact on the system. Again, this is because it's very difficult to say in system change, I've done X, it caused Y. But as I mentioned, this is my subjective observation. I haven't read enough on this topic to form any sort of valid opinion on this yet, if systems thinking is actually congruent with human nature and human psychology. But at the end of the day, even with these disadvantages, systems thinking is still significantly more suited to handle the complexity of the issues we face than the silo-based reductionist approach we tend to use now. I hope that answers your question in some way. It would be, short answer would be yes, it would be good to reduce some ego and change makers. This would be. And also think about, ask some questions. Why do we have to report our impact? Who is reading these reports and who are we reporting to? Do the people we report impact to know this problem better than the change makers?
Okay, maybe just to add here, the organization I'm working from, Ashoka, has this approach, and I'm wondering what you say about that. But as you say, it's hard to measure our systemic impact of the work of social entrepreneurs, but you can report stories. You can tell, for instance, we have an Ashoka fellow who changed the law in the Czech Republic on individual bankruptcy. So when you have to file bankruptcy, you actually, you see you can't pay your dues, you can't pay what you owe to the bank. And that fellow, he changed the law that it was a lot less pressure on poor people that had to file bankruptcy much earlier. And it's not like we say he was not alone in that change, but he was a very instrumental part in that. And again, we cannot say that he changed the law himself. There were different moving pieces. There were legislators in the Czech Republic. There were other NGOs, but he played an instrumental role. And we try to tell stories about that, that there has been a systemic shift. And then you can also say who were the people that were part of that. Would you agree that that is some form of, also accountability, that change had happened?
Change had happened, yes, of course. Change did happen. The law has been changed. Was this a solution to that system? You would get different answers according to who you're asking. I think the danger with this mindset is it still persists in us that there's a destination, there's an X and there's a Y, right? There's a problem and there's a solution. And if I do this and this and this, I will get to the solution, and then that system will be better now. And this is fortunately not true. In some niche cases, it might be true for that. So for that law, it changed. So that's true. But as an organization, it will be also useful to talk about what other consequences that law had on other people. So what about the entire process of getting that law into Parliament? So all those legislators were not working on something else, but working on this, for example. I'm picking at this now. but there's always some impact on this. There's always some sort of an effect on the system. And it's dangerous for change makers to think, this is the problem, and I know it very well because I'm an NGO, I'm a researcher, whatever else. And this is where the solution is. Oh, it's, you know, we heard like, you know, pedagogy, Hochschule and university need to get along together and everything will be fine. 30 years ago, it was like, we should give more money to education, everything will be fine. We see now that it wasn't, right? So if you talk to somebody 30 years ago and said, are you crazy? Of course we need more money in education. And we see now that's not the case. So this danger of X, I'm going to get the Y, and I'm going to lobby for this, is not really congruent with systems thinking to this degree. Now, I will also say this, because some of you might be wondering, so what do we do then? If this is, so what should I do? The things I've said earlier about being a learning organization and having clarity, as much clarity as possible over the system, co-creation, collaboration over competition. These are the things that would help you understand the system and make more informed decisions. So if you caught yourself not being able to answer those earlier questions, maybe it's time to talk to more people. Maybe it's time to socialize your, take your solution and problem and go to the other stakeholder, other NGO, other academic that's working on this, talk to them, and co-create. And because lone wolves cannot solve a complex problem. They're a part of the solution process, but if we were to collaborate and co-create, it would be a more meaningful part of the solution process. So there's technically nothing wrong with saying, oh, this person played an instrumental role, and being thankful and grateful for that person. There's nothing wrong with this. However, the mindset of this X to Y is dangerous for systems change.
One question that I've asked myself a lot is, we're talking a lot about systems, obviously in this fire chat about systems change. But I think that a lot of the people that are here today, they really also focus on the individual person that they want to help with their initiative or their project organization. And how does, if we only think in systems, then what about just the immediate, direct thing that you can do for a child in school by offering, I don't know, football classes, for example? How does this link into systems change? And if systems change is so big and so unclear, then should we just focus on that, the thing that we can kind of see directly?
So no, not really. So there are two things. One, we're talking about system change and like going for the root causes of problems. This is not the only way there should be. Not everybody should be a systems change practitioner. Humanitarian aid, for example, they do things that are needed today, right? So this doesn't mean we should shut down all homeless shelters and shut down, like, this doesn't mean that. We still need that, right? That's the top of the iceberg. Those are the consequences. But if you want to have a long-term sustainable solution towards some of these more complex issues, systems thinking is going to be more congruent with what you're trying to achieve. Because like creating 50,000 homeless shelters is not going to eradicate homelessness, right? It's going to keep them safe, which is good, but it's not going to eradicate homelessness, right? So this is what I mean. So the second thing I would say, we also work with kids. We go to schools and teach about sustainability and everything. And this still, I wouldn't say that individual is a separate thing from the system itself. We make up the system. All these kids, I mean, we talk a lot about Greta Thunberg, for example, right? And we like, okay, she's a hero and everything. But so many things had to happen for her to emerge as who she is as a person, right? Parents, parents' education may have played a role. The education system in Sweden may have played a role. So many things could have played a role. The existing momentum of the climate movement the past 30 years, so many things. So the existence of social media, there are so many things, right? So I wouldn't look at it as like, oh, I shouldn't focus on one person and give them some activities after class. because you don't know what that person could have been doing if it wasn't for those activities, for example, right? Maybe that kid will grow up to be a football player. Maybe that kid is staying out of trouble. We don't know, right? But this is also the same thing I said earlier about 1 + 1 equals, so the whole is more than the sum of its parts. When you have clarity over the system you're operating in terms of this problem, let's say education inequality, let's say wealth inequality, whatever you are working in, right? If you have clarity of how the clock ticks, it's funding, who's making laws, who's making the rules, who's engaged, what other NGOs are there, what are they doing, what is needed, what seems to be like some sort of a leverage point. When you have this clarity and you know your role in that system, you're going to do some free time activities with the kids. Then that's what you do. Not everybody has to do the most meaningful thing, right? We're all doing something together and something emerges out of that. You unlock change. You're not ordering change by doing this and that. You're not imposing change. You unlock the conditions through which system change happens. So you can think of it that way. So if that unlocking process is you playing your position as an NGO that keeps kids doing dangerous things, then that's what you do. But this is what I mean. We shouldn't put ourselves in any sort of a pecking order about, oh, I'm doing systemic work, you're doing less systemic work, and you're doing less impactful work. We're all doing something, and there's not really that much we can do to measure which one is more meaningful or not. We just need to be clear on what the system looks like, what are the others doing, what does it need, are we learning from the system as it evolves, and what is my position in the system?
So, Okan, if I could use your iceberg example again, we need people who are actually working on the iceberg, but we need deep sea divers who are diving down to the very bottom of the iceberg and also work there. I want to open up the floor again to questions from the audience. So any other thoughts or questions that you have for Okan? Yeah, Michael, I think I have a raised hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I'm Michael. I'm working or dealing with games and playing quite a lot because I think this is the way somehow similar to design thinking. So it's a way to think things new, to try out things and to make errors, failures, and allow failures, all these things. So anyhow, I was wondering if we could ever change system, as you said, because we are always involved in the systems, whatever system it is, we are involved, our thinking is made from this system. So we can go with the system, develop it, but I think it's hard to change it from this meaning. So it's a bit about meaning of the word change. For me, it's to change a system, you should, for my opinion, should stand outside. Then you can look, then you can analyze, then you have the possibility to understand the system. If you are on a higher level, as long as you're on a lower level, you can never understand the system that's bigger than you. So you can just understand the systems and then change them. As long as we are involved in the systems, we are just developing with the systems. And there is a second problem I see, that we, the first world, the white male standing here, but also we as somehow educated people coming together here, in some way educated, because I think everybody is educated, but we have some education from the school system or wherever we come from. We have some common education. So we think we know what a change is or what the best for the world is. And I have this problem with with seeing myself as such a wise guy. So my two questions are, one, what do you think about this problem and about real change, or are we just developing, as you said? And the second thing is, what do you think about playing as a method for system change?
Thank you, Michael, for all your questions. So I'll start with the first one. You mentioned that we cannot see the system when you're in the system. This I don't agree with. I think you can definitely see the system you're in, because this would also in turn say that you cannot see any system because we're all in systems, if that makes sense. Right? So the way to be able to see the system, this I will say, if you try in your bed, in your laptop, in your office to just see the system by yourself, this would not work. This I can tell you. This would be very difficult. Yeah? Regardless if you've been researching this topic for 25 years, this does not matter. This could mean that you're even more biased. But the way that you can see systems, you can gain a level of clarity in a system where you can be a bit more confident, is talk to other people. So Michael just said earlier, we should all be in different levels of the iceberg. If everybody pitched at whatever they're doing right now, we probably are in all levels of the iceberg. We should all talk, get together, and talk about what everybody's doing and see how we can be useful to each other, right? So the first point is you can see the system, but you need other people. You need co-creation. The second point you made about, are we kind of reinstating the system we're in because this is a philosophical topic, I would say, more than a systems thinking topic. I could argue both ways. Depends on, you could say that the alphabet and the language you speak were given to you, so how could you have new ideas? So this goes way deeper. I think that whether you like it or not, you're a part of a system change process with every single thing you do. When you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth and you bought a toothpaste, and that changes something for somebody. So the dangerous part again in here is in our human nature to say, I'm better and I'm more wiser than the system, which connects to your second point. I'm going to do things to it and it's going to change because I know the best. And this approach is dangerous. So if you're trying to impose change, to say, this is how it should be, I know the answer, I know the problem, this is how it should be, let's just log it so that this happens, this would be a dangerous approach from a systems thinking perspective. What would be more, probably more beneficial is what I mentioned earlier, is to make sure that your solution, problem, system, everything is as socialized as possible with other stakeholders. And you try to identify, after gaining this clarity, you try to identify what might unlock change in that system. Okay, so that's the first point. The second point about playing, I think I would need to read a lot more about psychology to have an opinion on this. Playing, which age group?
I personally prefer to play with grown-ups because there you can go on a meta level to talk about what we are doing, but anyhow, all ages.
Okay. I've used games, models, metaphors, analogies, all sorts of things to explain systems thinking, system change. I think it's a great way to learn. I think, yeah, that has been my experience on it. We also do group work in games with kids and teach them about things like the concept of limited resources. For example, you can have a game. What we've done, for example, is we had these kids stay in a huddle like this, and we asked them to lift one leg, and then everybody hit one leg and it got a bit like wobbly. And then we asked some of them to lift both legs. And then if they can stand still, we asked another kid to lift their leg as well. And then eventually they collapse, right? So this is a little game that takes 2 minutes, and you can explain how the earth is kind of in the same state. If we keep using our resources the same way, the same things might happen to us. So I love these.
Cool.
Sorry, one more. So back question.
Michael, sorry, I would really love to have one other person ask a question because we are almost out of time. And I just would like to hear if anybody else, if time for one more question, does anybody else of the group have one last question to Okan that's burning.
I can also stay a couple minutes after if Michael has a question as well, so we can get through that.
That's great. You can stay on the call, yeah. No other questions? Irina?
If there is not another one which is really burning, actually, what I experience today is that we tend to think in criteria. So we always do like it's better, it's up, it's down, and that's all my experience with all my personal work I do with companies. And actually a lot of change supporting and it's always pointing out of this thing that we say it's better, we think it's better because we have some criteria defined for the company. I don't know, more customers, more products, quicker, a lot of KPIs working with that. And but for me it's not working, and when I hear you, it's not suitable to think in these criteria to go with the change, but it's our work, yeah, and it's our world at the moment. So maybe you have some words on that would be nice thinking for the evening.
I actually, I also do ESG consulting. So I help companies also become more sustainable and everything like that. Some of them have to, some of them want to. And this is also the importance of, this is actually something you can understand system change with very easily. So you have this momentum behind the climate, behind climate change. You have people going over all over the streets all the time, every Friday. And you have all these protests, you have all this momentum, you have all these organizations focusing on this. This creates some sort of momentum. That momentum gets political, gets put on the political agenda of parties. They get votes, they try to change some things. That in turn turns into laws, regulations. Then the EU has pressure, and now EU has, the EU Commission now has regulations like directives. Like there's the buildings directive where buildings have to be neutral by blah, blah, blah. And then we come along because the companies need us and go there and say, hey, this is what you need to do because you need to change now. So if the company is put together by a certain purpose that is not aligned with your purpose, that doesn't necessarily mean that system change doesn't exist in that scenario. It just puts you in a more difficult situation to transform that organization. The question then would be a difficult one, of course. How can we make sure that we keep this momentum going to help as many organizations change as possible? So what you're referring to right now is the top of the iceberg. That's an event, that's a consequence. You're in that meeting room and they're not going to listen to you if you say these things. The systems thinking way would be to go a bit more down and say what mental models are in place and what needs to change here. And I will mention one other thing. Because we all want to change something, we are really fixated on solutions. And we are really not all that fixated on the problem. I think you need to gain a clarity of the problem and the system in which it exists in order to be able to even think about what could be a solution for it. So we talked a lot about what should I do now? What should I do now? Questions like what can I do now? And I think this is a great place to also think about this if you're really sure about the problem as well as the solution.
Okay, so I'm looking at the time now, and Lisa, I saw you raised your hand. Please stay with us maybe 5 more minutes because Okan already said he will stay on a little bit more. Whoever wants to stay on can, of course, stay. But for now, I just want to quickly sum up what we've heard from Okan. So thanks again for really enlightening us. System change, system thinking is a mindset. It's about better understanding the world and the problems we try to tackle. It's not so much about solutions as it is about understanding problems and where those problems come from. And what I really liked is that you better understand the problems and the systems they create, which create those problems through talking to people, through working together, through exchanging with others. And I think that's a very nice metaphor at the end of the day. Okay, again, Okan, stay with us some more minutes. Thanks again. Thank you also, Isabella, for preparing together with me this fireside chat. And thank you guys for joining. Hope to see you in one of our next editions. And for all those who want to leave now, I wish you a pleasant evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
So Lisa, if you'd like, you can.
I am a model freak and I love structures to bring people together. And my question is, if you have like the newest model of organization or organization model to accelerate this co-creation together, get in a dialogue and finding the problem with when it doesn't, sorry, I just got a call, so I'm like out of the flow. To accelerate system change. I don't know if you have heard of the constellation model.
No. Let's do it together now. Let's create a model now. Why do you think, are you based in Austria? You say you're from Freiburg. Why do you think nonprofits, NGOs don't each have 150 partners?
Sorry, what do they don't have?
Why don't they each have 100 different partners? Why is it always in silos on little groups?
Because the concurrence thing and competition is still stuck in our own body system.
Why is there competition between nonprofits? We're all trying to have impact together.
Because everyone has its own way on how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think everybody has a different solution for the exact same problem and everybody's too stubborn to like talk to each other?
Because there are a lot of solutions for one problem.
Could be. Who has time to have 100 different partners and maintain them?
No one.
Why not?
Because if we would only be in communication, we couldn't be in action.
Why don't they all have teams of 10 people working full time just doing partnerships?
Some of them do have the budget for that.
Budget,
no.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can't hire that many people to have all these partnerships. So we learned two things. One, dialogue is important. Mm-hmm. You have one issue and 50 people working on it and everybody thinks they have the solution. So again, systems thinking is needed because you have to talk to each other and socialize your solution and socialize the perspective through which you look at the problem, right? So for example, we already do this. This wouldn't like make us, this wouldn't cost us any more money. There's thousands of conferences, including ours, that just have people do panel discussions and talk about these things. We could just put all these people in the room together. It's like, hey, 50 of you work on homelessness in Vienna, let's say, come together in one room, talk to each other, right? This is not how we imagine what system change looks like, but this is actually the process of how it looks like. And the second thing, everybody in NGOs say money, right? Financial resources. If this is actually the problem, then our job is quite easy because we found the leverage point. Let's make sure to identify where all the money to the civil society is funneling through, and then convince them to only give money to people who have this mindset, who have a minimum of 50 partners or have some sort of a criteria. Some EU funding does this, for example. You have to apply with 7 different countries and blah, blah, blah. And then everything will be fine, because now if money is the main thing that everybody's going after, that they will change the fastest for access to financial resources, then let's convince those who have the financial resources that give money to NGOs and establish a criteria. This is also important. We came up with this in 2 minutes. because we asked the right questions and we gained some level of tiny understanding of the system that we operate in, for example. And this is what I mean by mindset. So to not jump into solutions, but first analyzing what's going on and then see where you can intervene to have some sort of a meaningful impact. Does that make sense?
I think I need to listen to the recording.
So the short answer would have been models are good because it helps us learn and try different things in different ways. But there will never be one model for system change, and everybody does this, and systems will change.
No, that was not the question nor the assumption, yeah. But like to get an idea what is the latest model to bring organizations together and to really have a very quick breakthrough for a system change.
I think not a model per se, but to find out what incentive that they work with, what incentive helps them change. So we talked about financial resources, for example. And if it's that easy, then that's the thing that moves, so that we can focus on how to distribute financial resources to NGOs. And then our job will be relatively easy, actually. But I think the reason why I picked on that is because I think it's not a systems thinking way to think about intervening in a system. That's why I kind of picked on it there. But
I'm just saying hello to Jan, who joined after the fireside chat has ended. Hello, Jan. We are just basically having a after discussion. Before we finish off, Michael, you had a burning question.
Yes.
You want to ask that question?
I have lots of burning questions, and I think we cannot answer it here. It's pretty interesting. My question changed somehow. I'm wondering what do you think about? Please don't blame me, Michael. What do you think about this kind of talks that we are doing here? Because we always, as always in society, at least from my point of view, we stay pretty much on the surface, but we never go in deep. So we are, as when you compare it with your iceberg model, we stay on the top of the iceberg, but never go down to the mental things. And as I mentioned before, we have the problem with going down to the mental part because we are so involved in it. Compare habitus from Bourdieu or something like this. We are even not aware of our mental models sometimes. So, yeah, isn't it just about talking? Isn't it all just about talking with each other, not 100 persons, as you said before, or 50 in one room, but eye to eye, 4-eye talks, 6-eye talks, where you give yourself ideas and multiply yourself. Yeah, I cannot express it better for now, but I think you know what I mean. Where you help yourself to grow and to change something and to see something, and then go out and talk with the next person you meet, and then go out and talk with the next person, and then compare all the things and try to have ideas on the one hand side. But also a big problem in the society for me is that I sometimes feel ununderstood, not understood, because I'm doing this usually, and I'm collecting things, and so I very often, for example, with Bildünger, I have the mindset or the feeling that they don't even know or understand. Maybe this is also somehow making myself better than I am, but that they don't even understand what stands behind it. So what stands behind playing, what playing means, for example. Yeah. So this is isn't it a problem of conviviality, if you let's call it this way. So you have to go down to the detail, and you have to have the whole thing in mind at the same time.
you said a lot of things there. I don't know if I should agree with all of it. No, but all jokes aside, I think it depends again on the system you are in and intervening in. If we take Austria, if we take, let's say, Vienna, I know Vienna the best. If we take, the impact organizations in Vienna, if you ask them, what's the problem? Why are we not moving forward? The answers I hear is a lot to do with money and financial resources and this. Right? This is, of course, a shortcut. Maybe it is. I don't know. But one thing that you can never go wrong with is discourse. Finding a way to have all of the meaningful elements come together and try to co-create, try to, you don't have to have a long-term collaboration, just get together, understand where everybody is and what everybody is doing and what is going on and why. There are many NGOs that also won't work together, okay, fine. But then we can also understand why they don't work together. So whatever happens in that room, you will still leave that room wiser than you came in before. So this you don't need any money for. You just need to find the right incentive and the right thing. And then you need to ask the right questions in that room. In my personal subjective opinion, I mean, I do workshops and stuff, so I'm very biased on this, but the skill of moderation is an incredibly underrated skill for system change. Because I see so many rooms that are incredibly important, but they're talking about things that don't matter for the root causes of any problem. I don't want to go to a conference about textile waste and just hear about how much textile waste there is there. I know that, that's why I'm here, But this is something I could personally say with confidence. Getting people together, co-creation, moderation, asking the right questions. But again, you need clarity of that system to, one, understand the incentive or how to get those people in the room, because they don't have an incentive to be in that room for that afternoon. Understanding which questions to ask, you will need a clarity of that system to identify the right questions to ask, right? What to do after, how, like, for this, you need to know the ecosystem you're in, you need to know how the clock ticks, you need to know all of these things, which is a part of gaining clarity of the system, gaining clarity of the problem, gaining clarity of the interdependence and interrelations of those elements.
That's a really nice way to end, I think, our discussion. Okan, thanks again. I don't want to keep you from your well-deserved evening. Thank you also, Lisa and Michael, for staying on this motivated. And yeah, be sure to join the next events we will have and stay in touch.
Michael, thanks for having me. I will, hopefully this wasn't too complicated or too ununderstandable or too ambiguous. Maybe we can send that link out that I wrote, the article I wrote about systems thinking, that maybe goes in a better order to explain things and has more metaphors and everything. Maybe that's more understandable. So I think it's on Eventbrite, but maybe we can send it as well. And if you have any questions as well, if I'm not mistaken, on that article, there's my email. But Michael, feel free to forward my email as well if there are any other questions or if anyone wants to co-create.
Thank you very much.
We're always down.
You unleashed the devil or something like this. No, I'm not a devil.
Very good. So we will share the article actually on social media and also with the participants. So thanks again and enjoy your evening, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.